Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It's Monday, April 10th, 2023. Time for another show. I just realized this as I was staring at the microphone sort of across the desk and saying, that feels like it should be over here, closer to me, and indeed it should have been. And so quickly grabbed the thing and, okay, I guess we're ready to go. Other than, not having any microphone or not being prepared with any stories, or in fact being prepared with too many stories, there's so much going on once again that it's difficult to pick and choose for directions to go. But that's one of the great features of a Monday program with Greg Dworkin. He's been rounding up stories. He knows he's got a direction. He's even putting an alphanumeric order to his top priorities, or at least, I don't know. There's some numbers there. We'll see whether we stick to them or not. There's a lot. I opened up, for instance, the front page of Daily Kos, and you can see that there's, 15 to 20,000 different directions to go in. There's the Morning Digest, with the headline, "These 23 states can all amend their constitutions to protect abortion," which would be a great idea to do, and it's a real possibility. In fact, of course, it's a possibility anywhere, as we realized when even Kansas and other red states, when given the opportunity to do so, have, by ballot initiative, have gone ahead and done so. And then just like running down the columns of things, the various, I don't know, what do we even call them anymore? The various columns and verticals and features from the front page. There's Ukraine, about which I'm not up to date, but there's a Ukraine update right there available actually from Kos himself on the U.S. intelligence grappling with a massive intelligence leak. That's something to come to terms with. Over the weekend, Greg Abbott posturing for his fascist fanboys, and Hunter taking care of that story as he, Abbott that is, vows to pardon the Texas man just convicted of murdering a Black Lives Matter protester, back when that was in fashion, of course. And, Texas had already amended its laws to allow for the stand your ground defense to be presented. And, for people to be presumed not to even have to stand trial if they claim that they feared for their lives. This one has all the drama in it, and an interesting angle. I think, as I understand it, the shooter in this case and the shootee, I guess everybody was a shootee almost in this one, both white. So the racial element is kind of removed from this, although this person was at a Black Lives Matter protest, and that matters too, because apparently before this actual shooting took place, the shooter had, gone on Facebook and social media saying essentially that he was on his way around town looking for Black Lives Matter protesters, and he was getting ready to possibly, premeditatively kill some of them. Premeditatedly, I guess. And anyway, there's a lot to this one. But there's this performative element now where you can even implement the stand your ground law, and still a Texas jury will say, nah, it's just too much. It's just too irresponsible to allow people to go around shooting one another like this, and convicted him. And Greg Abbott says, well, I'm going to pardon him anyway, because law, that only applies when we're trying to own the libs. And if it owns the libs to not have law and order, well, then we won't have law and order. Now, as I understand it, and we'll dive into it, I'm sure at some point, somebody did remind me, well, the Texas statute might not be, the Texas Constitution doesn't deal with pardons the same way you might think. And I keep, I don't know. I didn't get a chance to check, but I always recall every time Texas governorship comes up, I'm reminded that the Texas governor is based on the weak governor model in Texas. And the lieutenant governor has lots of power, and it's a very odd and somewhat different system. So it's entirely possible that, as this person was suggesting, it's not the final word that the governor says, I'm going to pardon. It's not entirely in the governor's hands. So maybe we can dive into process there. Oh, a million other things to get to. Of course, Elon Musk having various meltdowns and, temper tantrums over the weekend from the end of last week into over the weekend, currently at war with NPR over whether or not they are the rough equivalent to Pravda in his view. I guess he figures because national public radio, and it's of course a very different thing, and public radio. So apparently the top brass at NPR having an opportunity to discuss it directly with him. What does it mean to be public radio versus what does it mean to be publicly, government supported or state affiliated? That's a thing that I guess he used his Twitter platform for over the last couple of days to label NPR state-affiliated media, as if it were RT or Pravda or something like that. And the upshot of the discussion just ended up being that the top brass at NPR said, yeah, he doesn't understand what the terms actually mean, and he didn't bother to find out before he made this major policy decision, and that's kind of a problem for him as a CEO. Maybe he's not a brilliant businessman after all. There's a lot going on and lots of counter accusations as well, since as it turns out, NPR's funding, I think the figures they give now is only about 1% of it is funded by federal grant, whereas 4% of Twitter's acquisition was funded by a Saudi sovereign wealth fund. So maybe it's the state-controlled media in all of this. I don't know. Greg may know. We don't know whether he knows or not. We're not going to find out if he knows or not unless we stop and give him a chance to speak. So let's do that now. What do you say, Greg? Do you think I should stop talking and let you start talking and invite you onto the program and hear what you have to say? I don't know. I have mixed feelings about it. All right. What do you say? Good morning.
Hi. Good morning. Hi. It's Monday, and welcome to Monday. So, yeah, a couple of things. So NPR is labeled on Twitter as government-funded media. But I think at one point he called it state-sponsored.
Yes, something like that. State-affiliated. He's gone through 3 or 4 iterations, I think.
And it was bad, and it was wrong.
Yeah.
And when NPR complained, they actually pulled up some of the, legal mumbo-jumbo that all organizations have. Here is our mission statement, and here is this, and here is that. And in those documents, it said NPR is an example of a organization which is not state-sponsored, but rather is a public organization. And it said that in their own literature. And when it was pointed out to Musk, he removed it.
Well, okay.
And then said the same thing about BBC.
Yeah, well, I guess challenge everybody until they...
So, he's trying to, this is one of those, I'm eccentric. That means I have enough money so that I'm not nuts. Right. And being eccentric and owning this toy, what I can do is, since I was caught in a lie, and it's embarrassing to me to be caught in a lie, I'm going to change all the rules to make it as if, no, I'm not singling out NPR. And no, there's nothing in our written rules that say that we shouldn't do this, because I just changed the rules and I just called BBC the same thing.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, I guess he gets that prerogative, although it's all, as we mentioned, a lot of it is backed up with other people's money, including, sovereign wealth funds of foreign states.
The big overarching point here,
we have
which
one.
I'm going to illustrate with a tweet, is that it doesn't work.
Okay.
So this is a fellow named McDuff talking about something completely different.
Oh.
And now for something completely different, because maybe he's British. And he's talking about a theoretical discussion based on their complaining about each other between the Labour Party leader, Keir Starmer, and the Conservative Tory leader, currently Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak.
Still not.
And McDuff's dialogue goes like this. Keir Starmer, you love crime. You want to marry crime. And Rishi Sunak says, I hate crime. It's you who, in fact, loves crime.
Sounds familiar.
And Keir Starmer says, I think you'll find I'm the one who hates it and you love it. And the British public says, excuse me, I can't afford to heat my house.
Yes.
And, it's cute, it's funny, it's true, and it's really important because it cuts through all the noise. The fact of the matter is that Musk can say or do anything he wants about backtracking, We know what he said. We know what he did.
Okay. True.
The Republicans can claim all they want to about their positions, for example, on abortion being a messaging issue. Mm-hmm. We know what they say. We know what they want, and we know what they do.
All
Greg
right.
Abbott can make a big play, and I have no idea how Texas pardons go or don't go.
Me neither.
But a jury of his peers found this guy guilty.
Yeah.
And we know what that means.
He's guilty.
Oh, and by the way, new poll out this morning, ABC Ipsos poll. Trump's approval fell from 29 to 25. It's his
All right.
Favorability, because he doesn't have a job, so it's not really job approval. ABC Ipsos poll, Trump's approval fell from 29 to 25% in 1 week after the indictment, and among independents, 54% say he should have been charged with a crime, 57% say he intentionally did something illegal, and 48% say charges are politically motivated. The rest say no or unsure. Those are actually pretty good numbers for America and bad numbers for Trump. Very bad numbers for Trump.
All right.
See, the point is, he can say or do and claim anything he wants to. It's not working. I mean, there's the court of public opinion. He's losing. Yeah. So, he can obfuscate and he can delay and he can do this and he can do that. People understand that the charges that Alvin Bragg brought are real. And so, again, the British public understands what they really need to do is heat their houses. And so they get to the point. I had a short list here.
Yes.
That I made for myself because there were so many things that happened since our last show. And now I wanted to make sure I at least mention them.
All right. Well, yeah, I can see that.
So there was the Trump indictment. And this is all that, last week. Trump indictment fallout, Wisconsin win, the Greg Abbott stuff you mentioned, Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas. As a Politico Playbook put it, longtime habit of accepting gifts from a billionaire friend in Texas, who, by the way, happens to be a lover of Hitler memorabilia, coincidentally.
Yeah. Just
the expulsion of 2 black lawmakers in the Tennessee General Assembly, one of whom will probably be reinstated tonight because the Nashville Council is meeting tonight, and the county group that would appoint a successor to the other one, Justin Pearson, will meet on April 12th. So they may both be back. We shall see.
Interesting. Okay.
There's the federal judge's ruling about the abortion pill. It all happened, and we have to talk about it all. But the public understands what's going on. And every single time the Republicans say, oh, well, what we really need is better messaging so that we can appear more moderate. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, we are going to chase all the suburban voters, especially women, and we're going to chase persuadables, those few that there are, although there may be more than people think. But we really have to get our act together.
4%
and we're
more,
getting killed on this abortion stuff. We really have to change our minds. This federal judge just did something. We're getting killed on guns. We really have to, look more moderate. Now, Greg Abbott does this. They keep calling us racist. We have to. Tennessee does this. It's the whole big picture is the public can see what's going on, and they can't keep up with the bullshit. It's just happening too fast for them to keep up with the bullshit. And that's why the polls say what the polls say, which is Trump is not popular. And I want to give you an idea, actually, from the conservative media as to how this is hitting.
Oh, no.
Right?
All right.
It's an interesting piece by Andrew McCarthy from National Review.
That is conservative.
Yeah. And I didn't yet include that in the roundup I gave you because, I got started late.
I might have a conservative firewall. Maybe it didn't come through.
So GOP beware. Bragg's case is just the start of Trump's legal jeopardy. And here's the important part here. Don't be fooled by snapshot polls showing Trump beating Biden, which Democrats are hyping because for now they want us, conservatives, to think he can win. He can't. Don't allow the intensity of Trump's base supporters to mask how deeply unpopular he is with the country writ large. He, Trump, had consistently low job approval ratings as president, reaching 49 a couple of times, but generally staying in the low 40s and going down to 34 by the time he left office. This I know because, on this show, I kept saying, why are you calling him popular? This guy is not popular. which actually seemed high under the circumstances. And it was a statistical miracle that he won in 2016 with just 46% of the vote in a two-candidate race.
Yes.
Trump could never again win a national election after the 2020 coup attempt, the Capitol riot, and his continued delusional insistence that re-election was stolen from him. Moreover, the demagogic riffs that make MAGA crowds swoon and that Trump doubled down on at this week's Mar-a-Lago rally, because why wouldn't an arraignment be the occasion for a rally, are exactly what most Americans find deeply disturbing about him. If he's the nominee, the Democrats will retain the White House by 10 points or more, with the tide sweeping the Senate and House their way too. Trump would have you believe he's your crusader against wokeness, but down here on planet Earth, he's wokeness's big chance to cement its reign.
Yay.
Let's just say he doesn't see Trump's prospects as being particularly bright at this particular point in time.
I don't see Trump as particularly bright.
Now, Jonah Goldberg, who was on record as defending the billionaire Nazi memorabilia collector.
Yes, one of several
along
weirdos.
with David French and other, it's interesting because it's a who's who of why were you at this guy's house?
Right. They were there for it's the ultimate proof that, if you get invited over for a bunch of parties, you're going to be soft on the guy.
Yeah,
sure.
Pretty much. I'm sure the cocktails were great.
It probably happened to me.
He's writing on a different topic, though.
Nazi guy, but okay. Yeah.
This he's writing in the Dispatch. All the stuff is in the pundit roundup, by the way, for later. But so when Scott Anderson does, writing it up, right. I'm just telling you where you could find it.
That's helpful.
But Jonah Goldberg says the ties that blind, and it's an interesting little riff about philosophically what makes a conservative, which I skipped over. But remember, he writes for a conservative audience.
So I guess.
And then he says, with no other frame of reference, young conservatives are starting to think it's normal to be jerks.
Oh,
the ties that blind are the red tie that goes to your knees. That conservatives are now wearing as their cosplay uniform.
Yeah.
And he's talking about young Republicans and how cult-like they are. And, he writes about how it's a bad thing. And then he says, which brings me back to those stupid ties. Everywhere I look these days, I see young conservatives believing they should behave like jerks or like the body parts they cover with those red ties because they have no frame of reference, no meaningful political experience or memory of politics prior to this shabby era. They think being shabby is normal and smart. Last week, the New York Republican Club issued a moronic and monstrous statement in solidarity with Donald Trump. In response to my criticism, these domestic birds of prey behave monstrously and moronically. I won't link to it because attention is the currency they covet. I've since learned that the D.C. chapter of the Young Republicans is equally asinine, embracing the goons and dupes who stormed the Capitol as martyrs and political prisoners. Indeed, they've literally ditched the Republican elephant in favor of a silhouette of Donald Trump. I don't call attention to this because I think there's somehow worthy intellectual adversaries or anything like that. Rather, I call attention to it because it's evidence that the corruption of conservatism isn't just bad for conservatism, which it obviously is, but because it's bad for these kids. Surrounding yourself with people who think it's a sign of courage and strength to be coarse or bigoted is how you become coarse and bigoted.
Yeah,
and it's true. Way. I had it in the pundit round today, and I said, it's a tribal thing.
Yeah,
because young conservatives mimic their elders, and in this case, as in others, to no good end. But it's remarkable that we're hearing about it so frequently from conservatives, and this is at a time they're complaining that fellow kids don't like them. I mean, who would when your role models are Donald Trump, especially Greg Abbott, Ron DeSantis, the Tennessee House, Scott Walker, who claims that the only reason we lost Wisconsin, we conservatives, is because young liberals were indoctrinated. And they showed up in droves, and they pushed Janet Protasewicz to an 11-point win in a 1% is a landslide state. And the only way to fix this is to send me money so that my organization, whatever it is, the equivalent of Fellow Kids for Freedom, can unindoctrinate these young liberals
They're all
who
wearing
ruined our
ties
state.
to their knees, and
which is really funny because he's citing the fact that Protasewicz won by 11, which she did, and the University of Madison, in Dane County, voted heavily for Protasewicz, which she did. Yeah. But the locals who live in Madison are laughing. On Twitter, they're saying, he doesn't understand anything. The kids who voted from the University of Madison are the moderates. You take them out of the equation, you should see how left Madison is. This is the People's Republic of Madison we're talking about here.
Yeah, I've often wondered about that.
It's a moderating voice to have college students vote. Wake up and smell the coffee.
Interesting.
And so, the whole point there is, when you look at those polls, I mean, there's no question that Democratic ideas, policies are winning. They always have been. The only issue was that backlash to Obama being black and the culture wars were a way for Republicans to mitigate that, and that's starting to fail.
All right.
And that's why the whole thing about, arguing about who's tougher on crime is well and good. Democrats have to take to the center. Republicans have to run caravan ads. And the public is saying, we got issues here, guys.
So they're unsatisfied. And that's, by the way, I'm enjoying watching Jonah
Pissed
Goldberg
off people
finally
vote.
Right.
That's the point.
Yeah, that's true. And they respond to polls about approval ratings as well. I was having a good time watching Jonah Goldberg write, the Kids Today articles, which, just keeping in mind that he was the, filthy dirtbag, frontline youth Republican who everyone thought was over the top and jerky and asinine a few years ago.
Of course. Well, Tucker Carlson used to wear a bow tie.
Yeah.
And, pretended to be Kevin McCarthy's probably complaining now in Congress about the young guns who are a pain in the neck. Which is really funny because he used to be one of them.
That's right. That's what he used to call himself. And he made trouble for Boehner, and it was a huge headache for him and for Paul Ryan. And, they all knew what he was after. And then he got it. And now he's got another headache because he can't control his conference because they're all doing what he used to do, except he was never particularly good at it. That's true. But anyway, well, that's the story of organized politics.
Yeah,
everywhere.
there were three of them that were labeled
among Democrats
as the
too.
young guns.
Yes,
and I forget who they were, but all I know is that
Cantor,
Kevin McCarthy was the least effective of the Earp family there.
Yeah, I forget which Earp that would be. Morgan, I don't know. Maybe he was the first one who was actually a sheriff.
Well, the one who always got shot.
Yeah, I can't remember anymore. They all got shot.
In those movies. They all got shot, but,
shot, people
there were
shot.
three of them, and
Morgan
Wyatt was the brains of the outfit, and the other one was pretty tough.
And
the other one was the guy who always got shot that got the other two brothers mad so that they would go and do things.
I think that's the one I'm thinking of. And
that
Morgan was the responsible one. Oh, well. Yeah, Eric Cantor was and I think was Paul Ryan the other?
Yeah, Eric Cantor, Paul Ryan, and Kevin McCarthy, clearly the least effective of the three. Now, you could argue that Ryan and McCarthy rose to fame, whereas Eric Cantor, never got the speakership that they all coveted.
Yes, they did. He had to go first.
I mean, in terms of effectiveness, there's no question Kevin McCarthy is the least effective of any of them.
Yeah,
he just happens to be speaker
having gotten
right now.
the speakership. So, all right, well, what a wild couple of days. All right, and Jonah Goldberg, elder statesman, liberal fascism guy, by the way.
Anyway, let me give you some headlines so you get a sense of the picture here.
Yes.
This is from Politico.com. The Republican Party's caught in an abortion trap. 6 in 10 voters support legal abortion in most cases. Just over a third want it to be entirely or mostly illegal. So 6 in 10 versus a third. Janet Protasewicz's 11-point blowout victory this week for a state Supreme Court seat in Wisconsin was just the latest example of voters who support abortion rights outnumbering and outvoting their opponents, says Molly Jong-Fast. Martin Pengali writing in The Guardian, Trump's indictment and the return of his biggest concern, the women's. To the New York writer, Molly Jong-Fast, host of Fast Politics, there's some sense of poetic justice in Trump finally facing a legal reckoning in cases arising from his treatment of women. We would include the E. Jean Carroll one that's coming up like next week. But Jong-Fast says, or maybe even this week, Jong-Fast says the thing I'm sort of struck by is like how much women continually are dismissed even in this situation. There's so much talk about Stormy Daniels. There's so little talk about actually what happened. There's almost nothing about how he was married to his third wife, and she had had a child, and he had this affair. And that's as close to truth in Trump world to say that the affair is pretty much documented, but they don't want to talk about it. But we're discussing the nuances of who paid the hush money and whether or not that's a campaign contribution and whether that rises to a federal crime. Yes, we are. Well, that could be argued, but I was surprised at how little focus women had in it, that he's a serial philanderer who's the kind of problems that serial philanderers have. They even talked about paying off this doorman, and even though that story wasn't true, the fact that they wanted to pay him off, why do you do that? Because you have a sense that this could actually be true. It's truthy. And so she's honing in on that. But I happen to disagree with her. I think she's right about everything she said, except that the ethics of the situation take a back seat because everybody knows Trump's a sleaze, so it's not news. What we want to know is what are the consequences, and that's where the courts come in, and that's how come we're focused on that. It's not that women aren't important there.
Yeah,
they are.
I don't know if I don't know if I would agree there. I mean, the charge is what it is. We're going to have a trial on that. If you can get to a trial on the issue of his being a serial philanderer somehow, awesome. Fine. Front seat for me, if you please. Right. But I don't see it coming.
But unless he's a bigamist, I'm not sure that's illegal.
Yeah. So, you're limited in what you can do in court. But, she'll take every opportunity, and rightfully
so.
Why
does
court
matter?
Great
Firstly, you're under oath, so you have to
this.
tell the truth. And secondly, there are consequences.
Yeah.
For not doing same.
So, I mean, so the right thing to do in this situation then is to write columns that make your point while everyone's focused on this. So she's doing the right thing. So, all right. Can't argue with that. And I can agree with her point, but then scratch my head about how it gets to court. But if it did, it would be awesome, and I hope she would prosecute it.
Right.
So.
And just as we fade, Rebecca Traister had a story about this whole abortion thing, and she's pointing out you'd think it would be different between California and Mississippi. It isn't. People support abortion rights everywhere, even in red states.
People like to have lives and live them kind of the way they want to do it.
They don't like to be told what they can't do.
That's definitely a Republican trait as well, as it turns out. So we have that shared trait. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Still a million different things, waiting to go and emerge from the wings. But shall we stick to your agenda so far? Or?
Well, I think we cover a lot of things that are worth talking about.
Right.
We mentioned the Nazi memorabilia guy.
Oh yes,
and I was telling David
Crow.
at the break, it was just so interesting watching Jonah Goldberg be on split screen. On the one hand, pointing out that the kids aren't all right. And that it's really too bad that they're all jerks. And on the other hand, the other part of the split screen is saying, but, we conservatives who know Harlan Crow, this billionaire with the Nazi memorabilia who was corrupting Clarence Thomas, know he's a really good guy. And he's not what he appears because he collects Nazi memorabilia.
That does
which include
seem weird,
a signed copy of Mein Kampf.
That's an odd one, I got to admit.
Linen, Nazi linen for the table, tablecloths and napkins.
That I hadn't heard about. What is? I didn't even know they have that.
He's
stuff.
got
what is it?
little Nazi things, embroidered into the linen.
All right, come on.
Now, I'm not saying he uses this at the table. I'm
Okay.
saying he collects this stuff.
Well, all right. I don't know what I mean. All right, meaning it's not all right, and he's a Nazi guy. That is kind of weird.
He's a Nazi guy. I know that he collects Nazi memorabilia.
Yeah. Well,
and, why do people do that? The only other people I know who do that aren't good people. That's all I can say.
There is that.
But the point is that the people like David French and Jonah Goldberg who, quote, know him, end quote, and are defending him, interestingly, are also trying to shift the conversation away from the fact that What he did had nothing to do with that. It's just who he is. What he did was take Clarence Thomas on these, $500,000 each time junkets around the world.
Yes.
And then claim that I wasn't trying to influence him.
No. Just having a genuine friendship. $500,000 vacation friendship.
So
you should have
really, you have
friends.
to turn that question around, right? If I knew I couldn't influence him, am I taking Clarence Thomas on these junkets all over the place with Leonard Leo and, all these other people?
Whose job it is to influence him.
Yeah.
Leonard Leo. No, but I mean, I guess, maybe he's trying to depend on the idea that billionaires have money to burn. So maybe like you and I would say, well, that seems like an awful lot of money to invest in somebody I can't influence.
Well, they are invested
for him,
in
it's
Clarence Thomas, so they certainly don't want to see anything bad happen to him. But it was a pretty bad story that ProPublica had that listed all this to the point where
broke through very nicely.
Clarence Thomas actually had to say something.
Yeah, and he's
notably silent about most things, but he felt like he had to put out a statement. And he basically said, look, I was told, probably by Scalia,
keep my stapler,
that I didn't have to report this stuff, and so I didn't. My bad.
He blamed legal advice, which is amazing, considering he's a Supreme Court. You should never be able to give Supreme Court justices legal advice that they just swallow.
From now on,
whole.
I'll still take these junkets. I'll just report them.
Yes, that was another point that emerged over the weekend, was that the L.A. Times reporters, as great a story as they did on at ProPublica, the old timers, I guess, at L.A. Times were like, we actually did this story about 20 years ago. And what was interesting about that
story, he stopped reporting it.
Yeah, they said he's taking these junkets paid for by billionaires who are trying to influence him. And then he said, how did you find that out? And the LA Times said, we read your disclosure report. And they said, well, that's the last disclosure report I'm filing. I'm not going to tell you about these trips anymore. So it went dark for 20 years until ProPublica, I guess they actually say, dug it up again through other kinds of reports, like actually talking to the crew of these mega yachts that he was on, et cetera, et cetera. And so they reconstructed the currently missing disclosure reports. So, yeah, that was some lesson he learned. Susan Collins would say he learned his lesson, right? 20 years ago, he was found out, and then he said, I'll do something to clamp down on this stuff. If they had known about the ability to pay hush money and get themselves in trouble legally, they might have tried that. But
right. So I'm going to claim that what I'm about to tell you is coherent because I gave you a list of all the things that happened last week, and this is on the list.
That feels coherent.
And so that, so I could pretend that it's all, in planned sequence that I'm bringing this up.
All right.
But I want to go back to the abortion issue because James Surowiecki had a funny observation when he was listening to Tony Gonzalez. Now, Tony Gonzalez is a representative from Texas who is considered by Republican House standards a moderate. He had some complaints about what they were doing with the border legislation they're trying to do, which is why it's not out yet, just like everything else they're trying to do, which isn't out yet. And in fact, there's plenty of stories in the political playbooks and the punch bowls of the world about how it's a complete failure on McCarthy's part that he can't even get close to putting a budget together, to the point where some of the people on the right were saying, if you go ahead and try to put together something, we're going to bring up that thing that we did when we elected you, where you agreed that we can put a motion on the floor to vacate the chair, which you and I spent some time talking about with you instructing me on what all that meant. And that comes up because it's a reminder that the Republicans don't have control of this. So Tony Gonzalez said, women have a whole lot more other issues than just abortion. Let's have those real conversations, and let's talk about the other things that are happening in the world. And Surowiecki heard him say that and said, let's definitely not talk about the issue where my party's position is incredibly unpopular. Stop asking me questions about this. You could try.
Not a bad play.
It's the reporter's job to say, but I want to get back to this, and then ask him again and ask him again and ask him again until you nail him down and he answers. That's what the reporters are supposed to do. That's what Tim Russert did. There's no reason why you can't do that.
I haven't heard my tweet. You know, I haven't read my.
I haven't heard. Yeah, I haven't read my tweet that I wrote, so you can't ask me about it because I haven't seen it.
That's right.
I only
That's
wrote
how you
it.
get out. And maybe I didn't even do that.
I spoke it. I haven't seen it.
Right.
I haven't seen that. Well, it's not written down. You said it. Well, Of course you haven't seen it. You can't see what you said.
Right.
You can only hear what you said. Well, you know.
What?
Now you're getting technical.
Yeah. Right. Oh, this jargon.
Well, there's
liberals with your
jargon.
Okay.
Something else I wanted to mention, though, and I did mention it in the list.
Well,
Brian Beutler had a really interesting piece in his newsletter, the Big Tent newsletter.
Oh.
And it was covering Alvin Bragg.
That's what
And
tents
basically what he's doing is making the point that the Bragg case is actually pretty good.
All right.
Here are his points.
Lots of people doing
Alvin
that
Bragg's
now.
indictment of Donald Trump sent a group of liberal commentators on an embarrassing but detrimental rush to judgment. In truth, the indictment is mundane, straightforward application of a niche piece of New York state law, according to people who've actually prosecuted it in the past. And again, we mentioned there's a big difference between the prosecutors and the practicing lawyers in New York and the academics, often in some other state who aren't familiar with New York state law.
Oh, yes.
Who say, well, you have to link it to some other crime, and that federal crime is really difficult because the feds passed on it and they have preference, and everybody who's practicing in New York says, well, but we do this all the time. And by New York law, you don't actually have to mention exactly what the crime is.
Just that there be another one.
Only that there's another one and show that they're linked. Or that they try to do this in order to avoid this other crime, which is good enough. That's where, New York state law comes in. So
they're tough
by
on
the time
crime
they
in
spoke
New York.
up, Brian Beutler says a noxious conventional wisdom had set in. Unless it's reversed or overwhelmed by future prosecutions, the conventional wisdom will feed the GOP politics of vengeance and the Democratic politics of slinking away from conflict. So his point here is it's actually a good case. And the Jonathan Chaits of the world who like to say, well, we liberals shouldn't have done this weak case. We should have done the stronger case. They're only feeding the GOP being able to say, look, even the liberals think that this is a weak case. And that happens all the time. And that's why I think it's an illustrative piece. And so you really have to be careful about what you say and think about what you say, because trying to be contrarian in order to get people to link on you is, shall we say, less than helpful.
No, it's awesome. Click here.
What these Trump loyalists, says Beutler, could not have anticipated in their wildest dreams was the validation they received from a cadre of liberal commentators. And, he names names because he gives examples.
Jonathan.
And there's at least four of them. Right. Let's see who we have here.
They're all Jonathan.
We have Jonathan Chait, of course, leading off. And then batting second is Jed Sugarman, who's really been almost offensively outspoken about how this sucks. The Trump indictment is a legal embarrassment, he wrote in the New York Times.
Who's that guy?
Ian Millhiser, the dubious legal theory at the heart of the Trump indictment explained in Vox.
Ian's
what you
not
need to know
bad,
about the Trump charges
typically.
From David French.
Well, he's
call him
David
a
French.
liberal. Yeah,
that's just wrong. All right.
But
And
they sour on
one?
the idea of pursuing Trump for making illegal pre-election hush money payments to his mistresses, and thus trash the indictment as legally weak and politically motivated before they really understood it. And in doing so, they've helped create a consensus wisdom that's both politically noxious and, more importantly, wrong. And again, go back to what Molly Jong Fast writes, that nobody's talking about the fact that Trump is a noxious, short of bigamy, he has affairs with other people. It's really bad. And as a person, he's awful.
I feel like a lot of people are talking about that, but I see what she means.
And it also doesn't matter. Not to New York state law. That's not what he's being indicted for.
Right. That would be a weak case.
Right.
Like maybe not a case at all. I'm surprised to see Ian Millhiser.
We're still flying blind.
All right.
They should look at things like, for instance, they might have taken heed of commentators with experience enforcing New York state law who aren't throwing cold water on the case. To the contrary, former Manhattan prosecutors say investigators happen upon violations of this law incidentally quite often, and the norm is to charge the offenders. They believe the Trump indictment is pretty solid, almost like an exercise in painting by numbers. And in that light, letting Trump slide for incidentally violating the same law wouldn't be decriminalizing politics. It would be placing Trump above the law. They might have thought back on how the liberal elite has gone about the Trump Accountability Project in general. The past 7 years have been an agonizing Groundhog Day of watching liberals talk themselves out of trying to hold Trump accountable. Maybe we shouldn't impeach him, yada, yada. Yeah. The idea that people like Alvin Bragg have adopted a ready, fire, aim approach to checking Trump is ludicrous. The idea that after taking a pass on an opportunity to charge Trump with much more significant business fraud, Alvin Bragg decided, I know, screw it, I'm just going to get him on a bullshit case, is also pretty ludicrous. With those things in mind, they could have crawled back from the edge, but by then upholding the holy honor of the commentariat required continuing to trash the indictment, and it was too late. Fact is, liberal leaders are terrified of confronting Trump. Trump is entirely unconcerned with the law's limits and trespasses them flagrantly. What he's really good at is preempting and destroying paper trails, silencing witnesses, discouraging accountability through lawfare, and so on. So the difference is critical because there's nothing inherently unethical about pushing the envelope. If I became rich someday, rich enough to hire a money manager and a team of lawyers, I might ask them how legally to max out political donations or bundle them or stand up and fund advocacy organizations. I say this all the time to you, David. I mean, the whole point is that the reason this case is opaque is because Trump hired a bunch of lawyers and tax people to make it so, because that's what rich people do.
Well, sure.
That doesn't make it a weak case. It makes it a complicated case or an opaque case or a difficult case to understand, but that doesn't make it weak.
No. I mean, I don't feel that way either. I think we've had a pretty good explanation of the state of New York law. I mean, a high-profile case like that involving something as extraordinary as a former president of the United States is the sort of thing that, occasionally drives state judges to reevaluate the current state of their law and say, well, it's worked this way for everybody else, but maybe it's not great and not necessarily applicable in this case. And that could happen with anything.
Right.
But,
so he goes on to say, look, this is why building and inhabiting an echo chamber where it's taken for granted that Bragg went fishing is so pernicious. I didn't know. Brian Beutler didn't know until Tuesday that this is a commonly charged crime in New York. It's often detected orthogonally to other wrongdoing. I'm pretty sure Chait and the other writers didn't know. And I'm certain that benchful Republicans didn't care one way or the other. What I did know before Tuesday is that nearly everybody in politics understands that Trump is a criminal whose books can't possibly withstand legitimate legal scrutiny. Republicans nevertheless supported him unreservedly for 7 years. That's what you need to know. To assert that Bragg is persecuting an innocent man who simply pushed the envelope, no.
Well, that's true. And in this way, he's got something in common with what Molly Jong-Fast is doing. He wants to prosecute a crime that isn't charged and isn't chargeable, but it's good background information. With somebody on trial, you might as well.
Well, Molly Jong-Fast made the same point about the doorman.
Yes.
Right? It's probably not true, but the reason that Trump had to pay hush money is because it could have been true because everything else was true.
Yeah, I guess that's true.
So what point are you making? Are you making that the public already sort of has this feeling that Trump isn't always by the book? Absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
Are you saying that that's admissible in court? No, but that's a different question. We're talking about the court of public opinion here.
And no reason not to press the case there. I mean, Trump does a lot of his work there, and so this is good countermeasures. He's going to be trying his best to, I don't know whether he really thinks he's affecting the jury pool or not, but he's certainly going to wage a PR campaign by sending people out there saying that the charges are frivolous or weak or made up, and you might as well not bother doing them any favors by saying you think so too because you're a contrarian. Right.
So again, remember, as you just noted, that Brian Beutler is talking about the commentariat, the talking heads, more than the law. And he says, as Greg Sargent noted, the people who are rushing to judgment are those who are proclaiming the indictment the disaster before the tax piece is really understood. Contrast them to Charlie Savage, a diligent reporter and analyst who recognized that Bragg had addressed the main concern about his case, which turned out to be stronger than anticipated. And Greg Sargent adds, we all know how the pundit game works. Incentives are strong to call something early and then be right. But everybody knows there's no penalty for getting it wrong if you initially bucked your own side.
Right. True. And really no penalty for for not bucking your own side and still being wrong. But yeah, that's true. That's where that's the money if it is money. That seems like the sweet spot anyway for the commentary. And being contrarian is worth clicks. People get outraged. They just sometimes just go and hate read your piece.
Right. So in Brian Beutler's eyes, for Republicans, it's the tendency to lie, feign outrage, and martyrdom. And for Democrats, it's the tendency to shrink from conflict, even when their opponents are staggered and exposed. Mm-hmm. To not express confidence in Bragg or defend him from the torrents of harassment, to ignore his pleadings, which confirm that Trump indeed cheated in an election he barely won, that reshaped the world for so much the worse. It's hard to fathom confronting such a daunting injustice. It's easier to find a reason to look away. Why roll the dice for Bragg? Why act on what he's trying to tell us when even our intellectual allies say his case is weak? Well, that's the problem, he says. So I think there's some truth to that.
Yeah.
Now,
sure.
You do want to be cautious. If you're going, we are not them, and we can't be mirror images of them. And we're not going to take the LBJ approach to politics. Democrats don't do that anymore. The LBJ approach. He doesn't have to be doing those things with chicken. I just have to put it out and let him deny it. We don't do that. And it's okay not to do that. If you want to be a little more careful about it and take your time, that's okay. But there's no reason to agree with the Republicans when they start lying about it, any more than there's any reason to agree with Republicans like David French and Jonah Goldberg when they start defending the Nazi memorabilia guy.
Yeah, I would
recommend automatically take their side and say, well, okay, we have to give him. You don't have to give him
friendly
nothing.
Nazi. Yeah. Ugh.
Now, you don't have to weigh in yourself. That. You can just shut up. If you're a pundit paid to
I should try that.
Speak, it's tough to do that. But pick another topic, pick another column subject.
That's right. There's always AI. Why not try and be that
guy? The fact
guy?
is that the Nazi memorabilia guy isn't the important part of the story. It's the money spent on Clarence Thomas. That's the story.
Yes.
And you don't have to say disparaging things about Harlan Crow. Just tell people what he collects.
I can do that.
People come to their own conclusion.
Sure. And there is another angle in the story there, which is a larger sociological story. As I learned over the weekend, Harlan Crow, as improbably a supervillain named guy as he is, he's I wondered about this because then I saw a story over the weekend that Trammell Crow Jr. was in trouble with his own legal jeopardy, and then I thought Trammell Crow. I thought that was a firm name, like Joe Trammell and Frank Crow because it's all over buildings all over the place. It's Trammell Crow Sr., I guess, was a big commercial real estate magnate in his day. And anyway, so he had, I don't know how many, he became a billionaire on his own. And I was wondering how many of these people are there, these Crows, because this guy was from Texas and was embroiled in a sex trafficking case. And I thought, wow, the Crow family in Texas must be really upset that this is a unfortunate coincidence. But as it turns out, they're brothers. So Harlan Crow collects Nazi memorabilia and Supreme Court justices, and Trammell Crow Jr. is accused in a civil lawsuit of participating in or directing a sex trafficking ring that somehow, by the way, just for kicks, we'll throw in here that he's now somehow connected himself with Sarah Ferguson, the Duchess of York, which is weird because she's the ex-wife of Prince Andrew, who was connected to the other billionaire sex trafficker who was connected to Trump through his Pervalago club. And gosh, it's a weird and tight and kind of perverted circle that they run in. And it turns out that billionaire Texans, when they have kids and give each of their kids billions of dollars, instead of that thing that Republicans tell us to do, we don't have to have confiscatory taxation on them because they'll become philanthropists and job creators. And then as it turns out, they take their billions and build volcano lairs and collect Nazi memorabilia and build sex trafficking rings.
And who among us?
Yeah. So I don't know. It seems like none of them want to donate to, curing cancer or ending hunger in America or anything like that. They just want signed copies of Mein Kampf and sex slaves.
And who among us,
Right.
So Benji
So let's tax
Sarlin
them
was
instead.
noting, said, Igor Bobek first tweeted, Chuck Schumer says Democrats will act as a firewall against this right-wing MAGA judge, and that Americans will see for themselves the contrast between Democrats and MAGA Republicans who will stop at virtually nothing to enact an abortion ban with no exceptions.
Right.
This is a
Kaczmarek,
discussion
not
that Benji
Thomas.
Sarlin talked about,
But also Thomas.
branding and messaging.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting. Firstly, you know, the mantra from our side is often Democrats don't fight hard enough. That's one of the sort of subtexts of what Brian Beutler was saying.
Right.
And sometimes it's just simply flat out not true.
Aha. Well,
You know,
yeah, you should be aware of that.
You will recall that in the beginning, when it was Republicans first created 2016, Republicans got very upset when you kept saying things like deplorables. And then it became after Trump won, you know, I hate that you keep calling us MAGA. We're not all wing. We're not all MAGA. We're not all from that wing of the party.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when Chuck Schumer says firewall against right-wing MAGA judges, they don't even fight that anymore. Because to fight that would be to get into an argument with those folks, and the Republicans don't want to do that. So they've embraced it. And it turned out that Democratic messaging worked.
All right.
And Benji Sarlin writes, MAGA equal abortion bans has been the Democrats' biggest new branding move the last year or so. It got a lot of pushback at first, but seems like a pretty clear success so far.
Well,
The main reason for the pushback, why make it harder to single out Trump's anti-democracy extremism by tacking a separate issue on top of it? Instead, it just looks as likely to work the other way. The abortion bans make it easier for swing voters to buy the extremism argument. And we talked about this in terms of voting rights.
yeah,
Right?
did we?
Voting rights is really abstract. Sure, I'm for them, but it's not going to animate me and get me angry enough to go to the polls. Well, did you see what happened in Tennessee? How they took away voting rights in two young black men because they happened to have the courage to speak up? That's outrageous. Well, those are voting rights. Oh, yeah? Well, I guess I'm really more for voting rights than I thought I was.
All right. Awesome.
That's how it works. And so, you know, to say, okay, we're not going to talk about this because you want to talk about that is always bad. Link them. Put them together. Give people a concrete so that they can understand the abstract.
I guess it wouldn't be a bad thing if people who were motivated by one thing were then handed an overarching worldview in which all of these problems were connected and all of them were fronts on which they were called upon to fight Republicans.
And then Benji says, you know, it's interesting because if there were a lot of evidence for some large block of voters and elected officials who were pro-life and anti-Trump, that this move alienated, maybe it wouldn't work. But there isn't.
There isn't. Yeah. Okay. But if
those are
there
basically
was,
the
then
never
you'd be
Trumpers.
worried about that. Yeah. Okay.
And the never Trumpers aren't. They're so never Trump that this isn't going to alienate them at all. And yeah, they get angry that my party or my former party somehow or other gets all linked in with MAGA stuff because of what MAGA people do. And we hate that. And so the answer to that from Democrats is, okay, well, then take your party back. Don't complain to me about it. Complain to the people like, you know, this Republican judge in Texas who claims he's not Republican, but he's as Republican as Dan Kelly was in Wisconsin, and people know it. That's not going to work. Our message is going to work. So if you don't like it, then go ahead and do something about it. Don't blame us. You guys are the ones that are pushing these things.
Yeah, it's not my fault that MAGA is doing all this, and it's not my fault that I hang out. You know, the guy I like that invites me to parties collects Nazi memorabilia, and nothing is David French's fault, apparently.
Right.
That's good to know.
Now,
If
that
you're
works
David
the other
French.
way, too. And so, you know, you can see when, like, you have a lot of substance behind the charges, they stick.
Mm-hmm.
And when you don't have a lot of substance behind the charges, they may or may not. And the example on the other side, if you want to talk about politics, is so this Judge Kaczmarek in Texas and the judge in Washington State have dueling opinions about
someone said dueling rulings, which is great.
And what happens to the abortion pill. And it turns out that Kaczmarek said, okay, well, there's 7 days before it goes into effect, which gives the Justice Department 5 hours afterwards. They already appealed. Then goes to the Fifth Circuit.
Yeah, great.
And then, if necessary, goes to the Supreme Court. And my understanding of the law and legal structure is incredibly weak. But as I understand it, each justice is responsible for some portion of the circuits below them.
Yes.
And this is Alito's circuit.
It is.
The fifth.
Yes. Yes. For some strange
if it would
reason.
come to him, I mean, I know when stuff comes to Clarence Thomas, he often says, well, I'm not going to really act on it. I'm going to send it to the full court.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not automatic that just because Alito thinks that Kaczmarek didn't go far enough, that doesn't mean that he's going to act the way Kaczmarek wants him to.
No.
Clearly, Alito's sympathetic, but Alito may well say, well, there's a stay until we get to decide it. He could easily do that.
He could do that, I think, right? I don't know.
I don't know what he's going to do. Nobody knows what he's going to do. But the point is that when you judge shop, it's not just picking the judge. It's also picking the Supreme Court justice who oversees them that eventually this is going to go to. But it's supposed to go to the D.C. Circuit first. And if they decide to stay it while they figure it out, then it'll take, the usual couple of years that it takes to get through the system. And, all of that is important. We don't really know what's going to happen with that. But while this is happening, just to make the point that things are complicated, somebody asked Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, what do you think? And she said, well, I think that Biden should ignore the ruling. Now, that gave the political pundits the chance to say, Dems are in disarray on this because Biden says let's appeal and Ocasio-Cortez says let's ignore. The point there is AOC does not speak for the Democratic Party. Biden speaks for the Democratic Party. AOC speaks for people who agree with her. And sure, there are people in the Democratic Party who agree with her, but she's no official spokesperson for anything.
Not versus
Biden. The attempts by the commentariat to make it a Dems are in disarray because look what the Democratic Party is divided over. It doesn't work because you can't be a spokesperson for something you're not responsible for.
Yeah. Well, I mean, she also says impeach Justice Thomas, which a lot of Democrats probably agree with, but can't
Now, she
happen.
may want to do that because it's a privileged motion, so she gets to keep it in the news.
That's true. She has the ability to do that. Might as well make them vote on it. Yeah. All right.
Well, stunts aren't bad, but that's what it is.
Okay.
He's not getting impeached.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I thought we would proceed at this point. I didn't say at the outset of the program that we were operating under the cloud of another mass shooting because at the time we were just sort of reeling from the last mass shooting and we hadn't had a new one to operate under the cloud of. And it didn't happen until about 9:30, which should mean that we don't operate under that cloud until tomorrow. But because of breaking news technology, we're able to immediately descend under the cloud of another mass shooting. This time in Louisville, Kentucky, and Greg spotted it on the way out the door here and has a tweet from Governor Beshear who says that the Louisville Metropolitan Police Department has confirmed a shooting in downtown Louisville with multiple casualties. I am headed there now. And, of course, the obligatory admonition to pray for all the families impacted and for the city of Louisville. Not that Andy Beshear is necessarily advocating that prayers be the end all of your response, but I guess it's a good place to start while you go to investigate what's going on. There's like zero detail available except multiple casualties, and you know how early reports on these things go. So all we can do is wait for news and then operate as usual under the cloud of a mass shooting. And poor guys who do the flags everywhere around the country are constantly having to lower them to half staff, and it's a dilemma. It's a social condition. We don't know what causes it, as we like to say, or as the Onion likes to say, as the only country in the world where this happens. We just don't know what's doing it. All right. Well, wow. I don't know whether that's what's happening. Why Kentucky is on the trending list on the Bird site, which I opened up to take a look at Governor Beshear's tweet, but that's probably it. And I don't know. I guess we'll keep an eye on it. In the meantime, I guess we have to push on with the rest of the news. knowing that this other thing is coming. And, you know what I wanted to do? When Greg was closing things out just before, the actual last minute or so of his segment, he was talking about, harkening back to Brian Beutler's piece and the discussion about whether or not, Democrats fight hard enough, but sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. But sometimes when they do, it's kind of ignored and you don't hear all that much about the Democrats who are, in fact, fighting with all they've got. And when you hear those stories, it's kind of heartening. And it's troublesome that you realize, that's not top of the page news for a lot of Democrats. Like we were talking about the other day, the Nebraska state senator who has been fighting so hard, filibustering every single bill in the unicameral legislature there. So, talk about your effective filibusters. If you're, not only are you filibustering, but there's only one house and they can't even do, pass the bill as messaging and then point to an obstructionist Senate, since they're unicameral. But, and of course the name not exactly top of mind for me, but perhaps, I can quickly call that, piece back up so that we can give credit where it's due. We mentioned the name. We'll all recognize it when it comes up, but maybe I can just search the news for that. Nebraska filibuster. There we are. Michaela Cavanaugh comes up pretty quickly. So thanks to her. And I wanted to transition to something else local for me, just to sort of bring to mind, or something for you to do with 5 or 10 or 15, 25. If you got it, $100 and you feel like jumping in on a race that you otherwise would never have identified because it's not, it's local, it's not around here. But, I liked when I made the case for Julie Briskman here in Loudoun County. Of course, she became famous as the woman who flipped off Trump while he was driving out of his golf course while she was riding by on the bike, right? And then her company made a big deal of it and ended up firing her. And she said, all right, well, to hell with all of you. I am going to run for office. And she ran for the Board of Supervisors seat here in Loudoun County that covers the golf course area. And while Trump was still in office, won election to the County Board of Supervisors, and, just was an extra little finger, just a little bit higher on her part to the MAGA crowd. And by the way, she's up for re-election again as well, and running, and you can find her and donate to her. And it's Juli, Julie, in case you're looking for it, Briskman, spelled like it sounds. But I'll add another to the lineup of fine Loudoun County Democratic candidates who deserve support. You all heard the number of stories and all the crazy stories that we had to tell about what was going on at the Loudoun County School Board when Glenn Youngkin decided to single them out for attacks and, essentially base his campaign on fighting Loudoun County over its policies on just about everything, and that the Loudoun County School Board was such a focus and they were attacking everybody, and that the people who served on the Loudoun County School Board, who really, were just local people who were like, I got kids in the Loudoun County schools, so I want to be on the school board to make sure that the schools remain good and the education is a quality one and kids can go on and graduate and go on to work or technical school or college or what have you. And I want that for my kids. And that's all this was about. And all of a sudden they, find themselves in the eye of the storm because a Republican gubernatorial candidate has got an advisor and consultant who says you can make hay on attacking these local elected officials and branding, doing the whole they're all pedophiles and groomers kind of thing. And what the hell? Who cares whether it's really true or not? And so you have, local people who just, like I said, wanted to serve on the school board to make sure that the schools stay good and the PTO could have bake sales and everything would run smoothly and fine and we'd stay out of the national mess. And instead, they're finding themselves stalked after meetings and followed in the parking lots, and threats being leveled against their families, and people sending them pictures of their kids on the way to school and pictures of the front yard of their house, and trying with all their might to drive them out of politics. And I have a story about that too. We can turn that direction if we want afterwards. But, you know, you all heard the stories about the number of threats that were leveled, and you saw that there were members of the Loudoun County School Board, members of the Loudoun County Board of Supervisors who were in fact driven from office because of the weight of these threats. And that's why I think it's probably important to tell you the story that my local school board representative, Atusa Reeser, is also finishing her term on the school board, but having faced all of this stuff with kids in the local schools, and in fact, with kids in, you know, my kids' Boy Scout troop, just as Julie Briskman did for a while. And so, like, you know, just to us, just one of the local parents that you know, hand in your health forms for scout camp to her. And she's also happy, you know, so she stood up and ran for school board before it was known to be a life-threatening undertaking. And I wondered, you know, how are you holding up to this? How do you even manage, you know? And I could see where you might say, well, we'll just suck it up and finish the term. And a lot of people doing that and then saying, and now I'm out of politics forever. I'm never doing this again. Forget about it. Well, Atusa has decided, now that there is a vacancy in the state assembly, she wants to run for delegate. I mean, talk about re-upping under pressure, right? So she's seen the worst that Republicans anywhere, but certainly in Virginia, have to offer. It's been the most, I assume, the most trying time of her life. And then she said, you know what, to hell with all of you. I can see how important it is to continue on and fight back, and I'm going to do it. So I'm extraordinarily proud of her for doing such a thing. And if you're looking around for like an obscure race to get involved in, to show people that, like, you know, the local on the ground politics in Virginia or just in hot spots around the country, you can tell them all about Atusa. Her last name Reeser, as I said, Reaser, just like it sounds. And Atusa is Atoosa. And you can find her on the internet that way. And in fact, of course, you'll find her campaign site at the mysteriously named AtusaReeser.com. So not hard to find. And like I said, running for delegate, election coming up. It's this year. We have the weird sort of off-year elections here in Virginia. And you can donate online. And you know what? She's got a fundraiser coming up and all that kind of stuff. But I don't know. I thought I'd mention it on the air just to see if, you know, maybe there's a couple of stray donations out there, good, solid, low dollar donations from all over the country. It's the kind of race that you could see money coming in from all over the country because everybody has heard about the controversy, and how Glenn Youngkin and his, you know, Virginia MAGA minions made life miserable for the regular people who just wanted to serve on the damn school board in Loudoun County. And that this is one. And then she's, you know, instead of taking the bait and responding to the threats by resigning and running away. And I mean, I can't fault anyone for doing that. It was crazy here. But to find the courage to then say, to hell with you, I'm going to fight you from even higher up is really quite amazing. And so I thought that might be the sort of thing that a bunch of you might want to, you know, throw a couple of bucks into the jar for at Atoosa Reeser, Reaser.com. And yeah, she's got an Act Blue site, Atusa-for-delegate. She's running for the House of Delegates here. So you'll find her there. Spread the word. Tell people if you run into them. You know, you're looking for something to get involved in down at the local level. Now is, of course, state level. We're always looking to build a better firewall. Of course, it's very important. Closely divided legislature here in Virginia as well. So maybe we'll see. Maybe Daily Kos too would. That's the kind of race that they may end up identifying as a close one and a critical one at some point. Maybe they've already done it, and I don't even know. But anyway, that's my pitch for Atusa. You should go ahead and throw her a couple of bucks. Julie Briskman as well. You'll find her on Act Blue. And what's Julie's? Julie's probably juliebriskman.com as well. I should just check that out and see if I can find her website so it's easy for you to do the same. She's not only was brave enough to go ahead and do this, but is sticking with it. Like, she could have just made the point by occupying the seat for one term, but no, she's going forward. And by the way, briskmanforsupervisor.com is, I guess, where you can find her campaign website. And of course, she also taking donations through Act Blue. You'll find the button in the correct location in the upper right-hand corner at briskmanforsupervisor.com. And go ahead, if you got a couple of extra bucks and you say, I'm tired of sending it to Kagro in the morning all the time, and I've already sent billions of dollars to Netroots Radio and or whatever else, whether it's Daily Kos or, I don't know, the DNC. It's not like a super popular destination for money either. But we'd appreciate it, and it would help keep things sane around here and somewhat quieter outside. There wouldn't be riots outside. You'd hear it leaking through on the microphone and all that stuff. If we can just maintain control of, and it's also a great reminder and a great way to, put a finger in the eye of the National Republicans who, as I said, right after the last gubernatorial election, the illusion here is that Loudoun County is a lunatic red county because of the maniacs making a big deal out of what's happening at the school board and in front of the Board of Supervisors and screaming about protest votes or arrest this one or throw the other one out of office and groomer this and et cetera, et cetera. Go all the worst stuff that they could throw, but making it look like that Loudoun County was red and MAGA, when in fact it used to be extremely red. It was never MAGA. It was long before MAGA's time, and even by Tea Party time, things were starting to change, and it was trending Democratic. And now it's a pretty solidly blue county. And for all the rhetoric and screaming about Loudoun County, or all the articles about angry parents in Loudoun County, it's still voted 55% plus Democratic. I mean, Youngkin lost by double digits in Loudoun County. So, that was as big a margin as Janet Protasewicz got statewide in Wisconsin. That's a lot more voters, of course, but that's the point. Loudoun County is actually quite Democratic and quite blue, so she stands a good chance. Briskman stands a good chance of winning again, and Atusa stands a good chance of winning that delegate seat, and that's fantastic, and you can be a part of it. Go ahead and do it. That's a lot of pitching, actually, for the two of them. So good. I think we've got that base covered. I don't know. They didn't ask me to do it yet. Maybe, and I don't know whether they would ask because it was a small audience, really, honestly, compared to what they need for a victory. But every little bit helps. So I don't know. It would be nice if we went ahead and did that, and maybe we didn't look that small. Okay. Other stories. I mentioned to you that I had something else to oops, I hit the wrong button here for Pocket. I mentioned to you that I had a related story, and it's a really long one, and I don't know, do we want to read through the whole thing or not? But NBC News had an interesting piece about just kind of the way it is in Virginia these days. And it's got parallels around the country, and we've read similar stories from around the country. But I guess just to drive home, once again, hey, A, how bad it is nationally, and B, another pitch for it being particularly bad in Virginia. NBC News has this piece, and yeah, it is current. Just checking and see it's not an old one. Hounded by baseless voter fraud allegations, an entire county's election staff quits in Virginia. It's in Buckingham County, Virginia, with which I am not familiar, but let's take a quick look at the maps if we can. and give you some idea of where it lies geographically. You can hear me tapping away here. I'm going to have to zoom back and see, where are we talking about? Okay, so that's central Virginia, west of Richmond, south of Charlottesville, and kind of in the middle of the state. If you were looking at the shape of the state, on a map, and just poke your finger into the middle there. So that'd be, like I said, south of Charlottesville, west of Richmond, and in the neighborhood of, if you're, a Civil War type person, Appomattox. So there you go. And rural and small. And I guess, therefore, subject to this, every place is subject to this sort of thing, but particularly subject to it because, big Trump voting county, small election apparatus there, and so easy to overwhelm with the same sorts of threats that turned Atusa Reeser bold enough to run for even higher office and to turn Julie Briskman into a politician from just an observer and, interested and activist observer, but to turn her into an elected official or to run for public office. Let me read you the story. In Buckingham County, 4 people, the subheader says, quit their jobs after a feud between local Republicans and the general registrar consumed the small county. Jane Tim is the author of the piece at NBC News. Lindsay Taylor is, I guess, the focus of the story. Lindsay Taylor loved running elections here in Buckingham, Virginia. The previous registrar had spent nearly 3 decades on the job, and Taylor, 37, hoped to do the same when she was hired in 2019. She loved her staff and the volunteer poll workers, and she took pride in the detail-oriented work. She implemented dozens of new laws in 2020, ran elections through the pandemic, and impressed many in the rural, conservative, tight-knit community. Anytime you're describing someplace as a tight-knit community, there's usually bad news to follow. But okay, the tight-knit community of Buckingham County. But then the voter fraud claims started. And you can just about hear the dramatic music. Oh, there you go. Now you actually do hear the dramatic music. In January, the GOP. Yeah. They deserve that. The GOP assumed control of the Buckingham County Electoral Board that oversees her office, and local Republicans began advancing baseless voter fraud claims that baffled her because, of course, Trump had won overwhelmingly there and nobody disputed those results. How do we get to these voter fraud claims? The Electoral Board made it clear it wanted her out of the job because that's makes them look like cool, tough MAGA guys to say, well, we want her fired, even though she hasn't done anything wrong. There were people saying that they had heard all these rumors, that the Attorney General was going to indict me, Taylor said, days after leaving office for the last time. Mentally, I couldn't take it anymore. And remember that, people said they heard all these rumors. These people were also hearing rumors that people were putting litter boxes in schools and the kids were coming dressed as every animal under the sun and using the boxes. And they believed that. And they also believed that eating horse paste would cure them of COVID-19, drinking their fish tank, etc. And nowhere did they ever, of course, have any sort of reckoning like, well, the fish tank and the horse paste thing all turned out to not be true. They still believe that stuff. They may or may not believe the thing about the litter boxes anymore. But, these are not people who say to themselves, maybe I ought to check on this stuff, right? So then she, under this pressure, she says, mentally, I just couldn't take it anymore. Just like people up in Loudoun County who quit the job rather than stay and fight. It just looked impossible to them, which just, like I said, just makes what's happening here among our elected officials who are staying and are fighting and even trying to move on to higher office that much more remarkable. Back to the story. 3 weeks ago, frustrated and heartbroken, Taylor, along with 2 part-time staffers, quit. Their resignations followed a deputy registrar who left in February, citing the same conflict. The 4 departures left residents without a functioning registrar's office. There was no way to register to vote. Is that voter suppression? Yeah, of course. Is it a voter suppression of your own people since it's like a 55% Trump county? Yes, but so is, that's detrimental to their, whatever, to their, to them, period. But so is telling them to eat horse paste and stick light bulbs, wherever. And that killed a lot of them and whatever. I don't know why they're doing it. A state election worker. Oh, right. So no way to register to vote or certify candidate paperwork, by the way, at least temporarily. So if you wanted to run for office because you thought, you had to kick all those crazy groomers out of office, you can't, because you can't register to be a candidate. That's also not fantastic for democracy, but maybe they don't care. A state elections worker arrived in town a week later to try to pick up the pieces, looking through drawers and opening the mail as the two remaining members of the electoral board, both Republicans, because the one Democrat had also recently quit, began the difficult process of restaffing a completely barren department. Not only just the elections registrar's office, but the overseeing elections board was empty, devoid of Democrats. They had been threatened and run out of office. It's just sad that the big lie has come to Buckingham, said Margaret Thomas, who worked as the general registrar in Buckingham County for more than 28 years before retiring. And before, it was never here. Years after former President Donald Trump began pushing his lies about stolen elections, communities like Buckingham County are grappling with the aftershocks. What happens when election denialism drives out the people needed to keep local democracy running? The answer is not actually given here, but the answer is you stop having a democracy. And practically speaking, what that means is lunatic MAGA people step up and say, I'll take the job. And then everybody is afraid to run against them because they'll start burning crosses on their lawns if they do. And then you have lunatics imbued with power, and they now have the imprimatur of the state behind them, and they do dumb stuff like things that got the county clerks out in Colorado arrested and charged criminally with abusing their power and allowing weirdos like Pillow Guy Mike Lindell to send operatives to crack open voting machines and steal the guts out. So I guess we have that to look forward to. A lot of election officials I've talked to are asking themselves, and this is a quote from the story here, why am I doing this? Why am I getting paid like a civil servant to be constantly harassed? Said David Becker, executive director of the nonpartisan Center for Election Innovation and Research that helps support election officials. And they don't even get to go on $500,000 junkets with Nazi guys or anybody. Right? Whether it's the intent or not, the effect is to drive a lot of these public servants, upon whom we've relied for decades in some cases, out of the field, which will leave elections more vulnerable than they've been before. Even if you get a well-meaning and honest person in the place of the person who was well-meaning and honest and got driven out of office, you're talking about replacing them with somebody with no experience who may not know exactly what the hell's going on, might not spot things that are obvious problems to well-trained long-term officials that used to occupy these places. And at worst, you could end up getting somebody who's actively working to undermine elections to try and steal them away, or under the delusion that someone else is trying to steal them away, allow MAGA people to try and steal them away instead. Because they're trying to steal it, we might as well let our guys try and steal it. And to them, that's actual logic. In Virginia, all of the state's general registrars serve 4-year terms that end June 30th. And the electoral boards around the state that will decide whether to keep their registrars are controlled by the party of the governor. This year, thanks to Governor Glenn Youngkin's 2021 win, Republicans assumed control of all 133 of these boards. Members are party nominated, but they are supposed to operate as nonpartisan, according to the Virginia Department of Elections. And we see how well that's working with the elections for Supreme Court in Wisconsin, or with the aforementioned federal judge Matthew Kacsmaryk, who Greg mentioned, also pretends that he's nonpartisan, et cetera, et cetera. But in the era of stolen election claims, it is noted here, it's increasingly impossible to separate politics from election administration, right? Just basically, there's people out there that say, well, if Trump didn't win, then there's something politically wrong with these people, and so therefore we have to drive them from office with threats. Buckingham County is, of course, rural and conservative. There are more cattle here than registered voters. In 2020, 55.9% of voters cast ballots for Trump, and Republican Representative Bob Good won the county by nearly 30 points in 2022. That should give you some idea of what we're talking about. Hi, everybody. It's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and patreon.com, patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Networks Radio. Just need to point out, as I was searching around during the break, making sure I wasn't missing anything, finding out that I was missing things. And as it turns out, the eagle-eyed Darwin Darko was already on the spot with the Louisville shooting. Just, I think it looks to me like it's timestamped just a few minutes before Greg raised the alarm on that one. So thanks, Darwin, for keeping us up to speed, or attempting to keep us up to speed, even if I missed it. It's hard to have all possible inputs have their own screen here. Everybody needs to donate much more money if I'm going to have a screen open for all of these things. I need like 10, 15 more things. But I appreciate your letting us know. And there's a link here to MSN.com that revealed, it's just too early to know anything about this stuff, but at least it gave us some idea of what we're talking about scale-wise. Louisville shooting live updates, 5 killed, 6 injured, including officer, with the note, somewhat helpful but not particularly revealing note that the suspected shooter has been, the word they're using is neutralized, which... not sure exactly what it could mean. It could mean anything. Arrested, shot, I don't know. But no longer, as they say, an active aggressor threat. They've gotten away from now saying active shooter, I guess, which is, I don't know, probably more pro-gun nonsense than we really ought to be tolerating. But there you have it. I mean, the guy shot people. You can say active shooter. You don't have to say active aggressor. Anyway, we'll just see how this turns out. And at least here we have a governor who's unlikely to offer to pardon the person who was doing the shooting. Well, anyhow, let's see. Oh, right. Over back to NBC News' coverage of the weirdness happening in Buckingham County, Virginia. We jump right back into the middle of that story, having found out a little bit about what the county was like voting-wise. There's a 56% Trump vote in 2020, 30-point or nearly 30-point win for Congressman Bob Good, who's, pretty MAGA as Congress people go. And That gives you an idea of what we're talking about. Conflict, though, between local Republicans and the registrar began simmering around the midterm elections and boiled over at a January 4th meeting of the Buckingham County Electoral Board after the GOP assumed control. Buckingham County Republican Committee Chairwoman Ramona Christian, wow, gee whiz, we'll see how Christian she is, who had hand-selected two new members, the new members being Sandy Banks Birtwell and Andy Marchetti, selecting those two new members for a 3-person board, presented a long list of complaints about the previous year's elections, which are weird because you did pretty well in them. Her allegations included not enough Republican poll workers. What happened there? It says parenthetically, a majority of poll workers turned out were unaffiliated with either party, which is, in fact, a common practice for poll workers in the county, and probably not a bad one either. But, why does that disturb anybody? Well, because they don't get to control things outright, I guess. And they don't have people that they think they can depend on to help cheat in their favor. I don't know. But, there's a legal issue there, too. So, Christian, the Republican Committee Chairwoman, complains there weren't enough Republican poll workers. She complained about ballots that arrived at the registrar's office after she expected them to. Not like late necessarily, just after I expected them to, whatever that means. And a close school board race with absentee ballots that she claimed suggested fraud. Why? Because a Democrat won. Democrat Michelle Ford won that race by 9 votes. In her remarks, she name-checked Taylor, the registrar who had just quit, multiple times, as well as other residents who had served as poll workers, and asked for an, quote, audit of some ballots. We don't know why. We don't know what she means by audit. She just says it. The candidate in the box thing tells you what to say. Why do we have all these infractions? Why don't you know the law? Said another local Republican, Teresa McManus, according to a video of part of the meeting obtained by NBC News. I am putting you on notice for treason, she added, because she was a real genius. But the incidents Christian had reported, not only were they not treason, they were not crimes. Some appeared to be procedural snafus, while others were misunderstandings, but misunderstandings on behalf of the observers, not uncommon in these situations. The Commonwealth's attorney in Buckingham County, how do you like this for a name? Kemper Beasley III. Really? Well, anyway, he was elected, by the way, as an independent, said that a resident brought him the allegations, these charges here, including the treason charges, and he found no evidence of criminal election fraud. I couldn't find anything criminal, Beasley told NBC News last week. The former registrar, in my mind, did an excellent job. The Virginia Attorney General's office, and remember that was won by a Republican, Nudnik, as well, confirmed that Christian had contacted them too, but they said they had not and were not investigating elections issues in Buckingham County. They're just none that we know of. Sorry. You're just reading in the news that somehow nationally Republicans think there was voter fraud. So you say there must have been some here too. And there's just nothing. Because there was nothing nationally. So no surprise. Christian, who posed for a photo, herein linked, with Banks Birtwell, one of the 2 Republicans she appointed to the 3-person board, and election conspiracy theorist and MyPillow CEO Mike Lindell. So Banks, Birtwell, Christian, and Lindell in a photo at a conference in March. Christian declined interview requests, but shared a statement with NBC News in which she said she was concerned with the lack of party parity in Buckingham County's poll workers. The Buckingham County Office of Elections failed to comply with this requirement. There is one, which I discussed with Ms. Taylor just prior to Election Day, along with suggested corrective actions. All were rejected, and the election proceeded without conforming to the parity requirement, Christian said. Now, Virginia law says there should be parity in poll workers' political affiliations. That makes sense, right? And not more than a third should be unaffiliated with either party, if practicable. Problem is, it turns out that among people who will volunteer for these jobs, the vast majority say, for whatever reason, they're unaffiliated. And they want to work in the elections. And, you can't find it so that you can have party parity if the vast majority of people who are volunteering to do the job are refusing to say that they're members of one party or another. Taylor said neither party had nominated poll workers at the start of the year. And who do you want to be on you want party parity? All right, nominate some people to be poll workers. Nah, we're not gonna. I mean, that's on you. But instead, they'll say, well, why don't we put it on you and call it treason and say that you should be investigated? Why don't you do your damn job? Neither party had nominated poll workers at the start of the year, and the majority of her volunteers preferred to identify as unaffiliated. They probably thought that was a good idea, right? Even if they are actually affiliated. Thomas, the former registrar, said nearly all of her poll workers identified as unaffiliated during her days in the job. The Electoral Board, which was controlled by Democrats during the time of the previous registrar, at the same time preferred staffing elections with their most experienced poll workers, and Taylor organized the precincts accordingly. The rest of her complaints, Christian said, quote, documented relatively minor incidents that didn't affect the outcome of the election, but which illustrated the need for additional training for elections officials and poll watchers. And I guess she also thinks that they should be trained by Mike Lindell. My concerns did not center around allegations of voter fraud. I trust the outcome of elections in our jurisdiction, she added. That's interesting. Even though she had specifically suggested there was fraud in a school board race and asked for an audit and told NBC News in an earlier email that she'd been in contact with the Attorney General's Election Integrity Unit about her concerns. Basically, once asked about it by a news organization, she basically said, oh, no, I don't have those concerns, even though she was calling every law enforcement official she thought she could access and saying, fraud. Well, what's the fraud? Oh, I don't think there's fraud. The allegations, minor or not, quickly consumed the community. Electoral board meetings, historically sleepy affairs drawing one or two members of the public, quickly became packed and contentious events. Sounds very familiar, like up here in Loudoun County. After the January 4th meeting, Christian got into a disagreement with Sherry Ragland, a longtime school board member and mother of a deputy registrar, Rebecca Ragland Kelly. Christian told a sheriff's deputy that evening that she was assaulted by Ragland. According to the incident report obtained by NBC News, she subsequently received a week-long protective order against Ragland. Ragland said she, quote, plucked Christian's shirt as she tried to leave and called the incident just another ridiculous, unfounded allegation. Christian declined a request for comment on the altercation. I could see how you're not supposed to put even a finger on anybody, and I guess if she wheels and walks away before you feel like you've had your say, you can get upset and angry, but then you grab at somebody's shirt or just pinch, hey, don't turn away from me. That's an assault. Well, it is. Don't do that. Anyway, after that, Sheriff W.G., William G., I guess, because he goes by Billy, but probably also goes by Billy because his last name is Kidd, K-I-D-D. Sheriff W.G. Billy Kidd Jr. said he started assigning deputies to the meetings. So, next up, Maggie Snoddy, S-N-O-D-D-Y, vice chair of the Buckingham County Democratic Committee, yes, there is one, said she was livid after the allegations and began raising the alarm and mobilizing Democrats to attend the meetings. Good work there, Maggie. 2 weeks later, there was 60 people showing up for the meeting, she said. That's some good organizing. Frustration and disagreements from the meeting spilled into letters to the editor at the local paper and into texts and emails and contentious spats on Facebook. Several residents submitted Freedom of Information Act requests in pursuit of more information about what was going on. Buckingham County's Board of Supervisors, which includes independents, Republicans, and one Democrat, had unanimously voted to write a letter in support for Taylor in December, as rumors began to swirl. So again, Republicans were joining in this unanimous letter. In January, Christian attended their meeting and told them they were, quote, overstepping. I mean, she's party chair, and they're the local elected, legislators, I guess. I mean, they're the Board of Supervisors. She's overstepping, telling them what to do, quite honestly. But all right. But she says, this is not a Democrat versus Republican issue. It's not. So it wasn't her saying it. That was Thomas Jordan Miles III. Everybody's the third here. The Democratic supervisor. Okay, so he's a member of the Board of Supervisors, the lone Democrat on the Board of Supervisors, who, I guess, joined also in this unanimous letter in support of Taylor, and saying, all right, it's not Democrat versus Republican. It's a right versus wrong issue. Now, Taylor, the just resigned, then current registrar, said she wrote up a document responding to Christian's allegations, but members of the Electoral Board declined to discuss it with her at the next meeting. She told NBC News she began to hear personal rumors, like one that her mother-in-law didn't like her because her politics are so left-leaning. Taylor said she isn't a Democrat or a Republican. She has voted for candidates in both parties and believed it was important to be nonpartisan as registrar. But her family was hurt by the rumor, she said. Rebecca Ragland Kelly, the deputy registrar in Buckingham County, whose mother was served with the protective order, was the first to quit on February 17th. Please understand and make it clear on why I've decided to leave. In the past few months, and especially in the past few weeks, I have seen the new electoral board members have zero respect for you, your staff, and the residents of Buckingham County, she wrote in a resignation letter addressed to Taylor, which she shared with NBC News. I feel the new board members have questioned not only my reputation, ethics, and integrity, but yours as well. Efforts to oust Taylor began last year, according to several local Republicans who spoke with NBC News. Rick Caldwell, a Republican who served on the Buckingham County Electoral Board through the end of last year, said leadership in the county party told him the state GOP, quote, expected electoral board members to be more involved in local Republican politics. He didn't want additional time commitments and decided to step down at the end of the year. Randy Biggers, a Republican from Buckingham County who had volunteered as a poll worker for many years, hoped to take his place. He started attending meetings of the county GOP last May and said he was alarmed by how Christian and McManus, I don't remember who McManus is, bashed Taylor at meetings. In November, Biggers realized that he would get Christian's nomination only if he agreed to her agenda. Ramona reached out to me, and one of the things that kept coming up was, if you get on the board, in order for you to get on the board, you need to get rid of Lindsay. Flat out, he said. And I said, I want to do the right thing, but I don't want to fire Lindsay. He withdrew his name from consideration and was not nominated. So people are being run out of the candidacies from the Republican side because they won't swear to, agree ahead of time to the Republican chairwoman's agenda of purging the electoral boards and claiming fraud and accusing people of treason based on I don't know what. Andrew Pullen, a school board member in a nearby county and a political operative who works to elect Republican candidates, said Christian told him in early January that she had been asking electoral board candidates if they were open to firing Taylor. Christian said in her statement to NBC News that her questions were, quote, focused on the ability of potential board members to make hard, fact-based employment decisions, and not on a precondition that the employment of any one person be terminated. Pullen, who, along with Miles, the Democratic supervisor, published the clip of Christian saying she was seeking electoral board members who would be open to firing Taylor. He doesn't buy it. If there's voter fraud in Atlanta, if you watched that stuff in Atlanta and it bothered you, go to Atlanta. If you watched the stuff in Maricopa County and it bothered you, go there, Pullen said. But taking that fight to Lindsay Taylor in Dillwyn, a county that's red, that Republicans have never suggested voter fraud in, simply because you now have the ability with a Republican governor to replace her, it's just disgusting. On March 10th, the Buckingham County Electoral Board called an emergency meeting where the board announced that Marchetti, the other person who had been nominated by the Republican chairwoman, Marchetti had resigned his post and was being replaced by, I don't know who this is, as they say it as though we have had an introduction to, Cerwinski. I don't know who, Cerwinski. That's a surname, but I don't think that they've introduced who Cerwinski was. Marchetti did not respond to a request for comment. So one of the two hand-picked new members quits. All right. Let's see. There, I guess at this meeting on March 10th, the board announced it would not renew Taylor as registrar when her 4-year term ended on June 30th. She could reapply for the position if she wanted to, Cerwinski, the new replacement, said. Some of the meeting attendees jeered angrily at her, I think Cerwinski. According to an audio recording of the meeting shared with NBC News, she's a smart person and she will pick the right option, Cerwinski said, according to an audio recording of the meeting shared with NBC News. A week later, Taylor, in fact, decided to resign. When she told her 2 part-time employees of her intention to leave, they opted to go as well. On March 20th, her final day in the office, Taylor finished all the work she could do and packed up her desk. I didn't want to have to quit. I liked the job I was doing, said Paul Garrett, a retired math teacher and one of the part-time staffers. But I did it because of supporting Lindsay. When she felt she had to leave, I felt like I should have left. He said many of the issues raised by local Republicans indicated that they didn't understand how elections are run in the county. Also not uncommon. I'm not saying it couldn't happen somewhere, Garrett said, but there's so many safeguards that we have in place. Buckingham County may not be the only county in the state that will have completely new staff administering its elections and safeguards this year. At least 6 other communities are considering not reappointing their registrars, said John Nunnally, first vice president of the Virginia Electoral Board Association and a Republican electoral board member in Caroline County. Carolyn Sherayko, a Democrat on the Lynchburg County Electoral Board, nearby, by the way, to Buckingham, and former registrar in the county, also resigned in late March because the Republican members on the board were ousting the registrar and deputy registrar in her county. At the annual meeting of the Virginia Electoral Board Association in late March, days after Taylor resigned, there was so much talk about reappointing or ousting sitting registrars that organizers arranged an impromptu panel discussion on the issue. Nunnally sat on the panel and told attendees that reappointment is the norm. It usually is. Everybody's like, who cares? Only one person wants the job anyway. Just put them back in there. Election administration is a difficult job, and experienced registrars are hard to come by, Nunnally said. He added that he had spoken with the Republican electoral board members from Buckingham County, Cerwinski and Banks Birtwell. He said he told them, you need to have a plan, because if you do not reappoint your registrar, that office still has to be open, and the electoral board then becomes responsible for that office being open. In other words, it falls on you. I don't know if they knew that. But maybe that was their plan, right? Well, if I don't we vote not to reappoint them, then I control the place. Maybe that was what they wanted. Both Cerwinski and Banks Birtwell declined interview requests, but a spokesperson for the Virginia Department of Elections, Andrea Gaines, said they are assisting the members in processing paperwork such as voter registrations. The board members now face the difficult task of restaffing an office they've worked with for mere weeks. Serwinski was appointed to the Electoral Board ahead of the March 10th meeting. Banks-Birtwell took up her position in January. The Electoral Board's most experienced member, Democrat Gail Braxton, recently stepped down as well. At the most recent meeting of the Buckingham County Electoral Board in late March, Braxton said the board had completed an investigation into the issues Christian raised and found no violations of law. Ta-da! Several days later, she resigned from the Electoral Board. Braxton. Okay. Larry Davis, a Democrat who served on the board through the end of last year when Youngkin's election forced him out, said he declined a recent request from his party to fill Braxton's seat on the Electoral Board. Still, he's worried about how the election in November will go. The next registrar will have zero experience. The board won't have any experience. I would say at least half of the officers of elections are going to quit, he said, referring to poll workers. Who's going to work the election? And the answer, I guess, is Republicans who show up and say, I'll do it. And I also believe that we should all eat horse paste and that the election was stolen. And the fact that they're electronic voting machines means that Italian satellites are controlling them. And I want everything done on paper and I want to count it. And by the way, if there's a vote cast for a Democrat, it's fraud. And they may be the only people around who are willing to do this work. I don't know. It's a little scary, a little worrisome, and has carried us all the way almost to the end of today's show. Golly gee. Well, not a surprise. It was a big, long article. Man, there's still a lot of things to get to, of course. By the way, I guess maybe we'll just mention this because we've got a few minutes left and we don't have to get too in depth in it. You can read the article if you want on your own, but I mentioned to you that billionaire guy who takes Clarence Thomas on all these vacations, not only the Nazi memorabilia collection, which is a little bit weird, but the brother of a guy who has his own issues. A quick blurb on this one. It's weird, by the way, where you have to go for this information. I mean, it appears to be true that they're related. But I don't know. It's not although, it took 20 years to get ProPublica around or it didn't take them 20 years. But now that they've published this fantastic article, we find out that this information has been sitting out there for 20 years, waiting to be discovered. So maybe just major news outlets not onto this story yet. But if you look at the otherwise, I would never turn to showbiz411.com. And what does this have to do with showbiz? I still don't know, but there's the headline tells us Clarence Thomas scandal, much worse. Brother of billionaire patron sued in human trafficking scandal. And there's another article that I've got about this that focuses more directly on him. But this from The Telegraph, the British paper, which considerably better known and more widely circulated than Showbiz 411. But they're the ones that made the link to Sarah Ferguson. Billionaire linked to Sarah Ferguson, accused of financing sex trafficking ring, say Telegraph reporters Jamie Johnson, Roland Oliphant, Nick Allen, Rosina Sabur, Vivian Song, and James Kilner, if I have that all correct. Look at that. That's, I guess they all had something to do with it, but the official version on the site, the byline goes to Washington editor Rosina Sabur alone. I don't know whether everybody else is credited with contributing to the story or what, but sometimes they just, like AI chatbots, make things up. But that's true. This is the story. Trammell Crow Jr., who reportedly met with the Duchess on his Texas ranch this year. Texas ranches for all these guys. Faces a lawsuit from two women. We'll just blurt out what we can before the show ends here, just to give you some idea of what we're dealing with. A billionaire Texan property tycoon linked to the Duchess of York has been accused of financing a sex trafficking ring in the U.S. And this is from, by the way, not that long ago, March 20th. But this one didn't rise to our radar. And it's not saying that Sarah Ferguson is involved in the sex trafficking ring either. It's just bad luck for her, I guess. Maybe, I don't know. But is it also bad luck to be involved with a guy with a Nazi memorabilia collection? Trammell Crow Jr., who Sarah Ferguson has reportedly struck up a friendship with, has been named in a lawsuit by two women who claim he financed a sex and labor trafficking venture. Mr. Crow, 72, a property magnate and environmental philanthropist. So maybe we don't know what his politics are like. But, could be actually maybe a liberal-ish guy in the end, met with the Duchess on his ranch near Austin, Texas earlier this year, according to The Sun, a British tabloid that probably you shouldn't trust any better than Showbiz 411, or maybe even trust Showbiz 411 more than them. I don't know. Mr. Crow inherited his large fortune from his father, Fred Trammell Crow, once known as America's biggest landlord and a major Republican donor. He reportedly struck up an unlikely friendship with the Duchess over their shared interest in environmental issues. It has since emerged that Mr. Crow is facing a lawsuit, not a criminal charge, but lawsuit from two women who claim they were sexually abused in a trafficking venture for which he provided the, quote, essential financial assistance. Now, Mr. Crow's lawyer, Ken Stone, said the accusations were, quote, absurd and blatantly false. It is another embarrassing episode, from the British point of view, for the Duke and Duchess of York following Prince Andrew's settlement over sex abuse claims last year. Of course, those you might recall are his weird connections with now deceased billionaire sex trafficking weirdo Jeffrey Epstein, who made his sex trafficking bones on the pool deck of Pervalago under Donald Trump's watch, where he was culling local teenagers for his weird abusive misadventures, let's say. I don't know, couldn't say much worse about that. And that involved Prince Andrew. And gosh, it's just weird how everybody lands eventually in the clutches of billionaire sex traffickers. I guess it's a bigger problem than we thought. Lyndon LaRouche was right. Oh my God.
Radio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the morning with David Waldman.
Right. Didn't Lyndon LaRouche think, he kept insisting that the Queen of England was involved in some international criminal conspiracies, and as it turns out, her son saw her, and her daughter-in-law somehow now connect. I don't know. She didn't really do anything. Weird. Stay tuned. Justice Putnam has things to make real sense of the world next.